All right. It is my privilege to introduce Mike Heiser tonight. The latest thing on his resume is that he just finished his PhD, so I think you can give him a round of applause for that. His PhD is in Hebrew Bible and ancient Semitic languages, and has the ability from his studies to translate in about a dozen languages, which is just amazing. In ancient language level in biblical studies. He's been on Coast to Coast 9 times, Coast to Coast AM 9 times. And just personally, I have to say, I've heard him several times, read some of his works, and I feel like he's probably one of the best studied people I've ever sat under. Just has an incredible breadth of knowledge. And his forte, and you'll see it tonight, is taking your questions and giving you answers that really make sense and that are solid from research. But above and beyond any of that, the thing that I have to say about him is that he has just a gentle, godly spirit. And I appreciate that very much. So I'm going to introduce Mike Heiser.
Thanks for that. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, I want to say a few things. This is my favorite talk to give because I can slow down. Whenever I do this, I seem to get a good time slot, hour and a half. When I did this in Houston at the HUFON meeting, it's Houston UFO Network, probably about two summers ago now. After I was done with this, we went for 4 hours in question and answer. No, I'm not suggesting anything, but that's okay. I've checked with Guy. I told my wife not to expect me back at any reasonable hour. I'm just telling you, by past experience, this generates a lot of questions. I don't mind answering them. I'll stay as long as you want to stay. This is also something I enjoy doing because I like the give and take with an audience. It is really right up my alley because of my background. I do want to say, though, that this is also the material that gets me in the most trouble because of the, it's fairly confrontational. With Zechariah Sitchin, I don't know Zechariah Sitchin. I've not met him. When I wrote the first draft of The Facade, which is sort of a novelization of my views on a whole range of things related to UFOs and abductions and all that sort of thing. When I first did that draft, I had never heard of him. I had heard of Eric von Daniken, but I had never heard of Zechariah Sitchin. After I did the first draft and started to have some people read it, I began to hear the name, so I looked him up and got a couple books and read his material. And at first I thought, hey, this is really cool. I found somebody, because all I had read was the back cover. Ancient language scholar, Sumerian scholar, dealing with the topics that I was interested in. I thought, this is pretty cool because somebody has gone this route before and I will have some direction because, frankly, there's just nobody who is credentialed in ancient languages who does this sort of thing, who has these interests. And I have to be pretty blunt with you, I was very disappointed. I will say some things tonight, as Guy said, we're all going to go away offended, at least once during the conference. I was really disappointed. I don't think Zechariah Sitchin knows any of the languages. I've said that on Coast to Coast AM, so there's no point in not saying it here. That's the best way I can characterize it. It was a disappointment. When I went on with Art Bell, now 3 years ago, he asked me if I would be willing to debate Zechariah Sitchin. I said, sure, that would be fine. And I have not heard a peep from the Sitchin camp since. Now, I think I know why that is. I think at the end of this, you'll know why it is. I say all that to say this. My gripe with Sitchin is purely academic. I do not think, especially, you have to understand the context from which I'm coming. When you're in graduate school, you do not do things and survive like make arguments without proof, like make things up from ancient texts that just aren't there. You will just be essentially just shot on the spot. Your career is over. Okay, you do not do things like that. And that's what I encountered in Sitchin's works, and plus all sorts of just plain mistakes. Now I want to preface our beginning here by saying, in reference to my title, why you should care about honesty and scholarship. The reason you should care is because maybe there's one of you out in the audience here who has studied an ancient language or two, or maybe has a degree in it, but by and large, someone who picks up Zechariah Sitchin's works, or goes to a website, or looks at this material on the internet, you have no idea how to interact and how to critique this material, because it's not your field. You all have different fields, you all have different interests. I said last week to George Norrie on Coast to Coast, I said, you know, George, if you had this interest, you know, you could do some of this work yourself, but it is not very good for your social life. I'm still astonished that I got married. Okay, I actually said that to him. And I mean, I kind of am. I'm still astonished because it's nerdy, okay, to like to parse verbs, okay? Let's be upfront and honest about it. But there are people who do this. There are people who devote their lives to ancient languages, manuscript studies, cuneiform, whatever. And when you are being fed information related to this material, and the author knows that you cannot check him, that's why you should care. Because you are being sold a bill of goods. We are not on the level here that I disagree with certain translations of tablets. The level we're talking about here is that the material either exists or it doesn't. We're not talking about differences of translation technique. We're talking about fabrication of material. And I've picked 6 items that we're going to go through in relation to Sitchin's work. Again, it's hard for me to stand up here and say it's not personal. It isn't, but I know that if you're a real devotee of Sitchin, you're going to feel that way. I don't know the guy. He seems like a nice guy. I mean, I've never heard anything from him. I mean, I've heard him on Coast to Coast once or twice that would make me think he's evil and bad. I have had hosts tell me, people you would know, names you would know, that he is that. I have no idea. I don't think that. I have no basis for saying that. What I can stand up here and tell you tonight is that his scholarship is really bad. Okay, that I can say. Now, with that as sort of a segue of an intro here, what makes, I should add this. This was illustrative with what happened last week. Did anybody catch the Coast to Coast show last week? Okay, let me tell you how these things run. You talk to the producer, you set a date, and then she asks you, Lisa Lyons, okay, write up 20 questions for George. Okay, it's a normal procedure. So I deliberately said, you know what, I'm not going to mention Zechariah Sitchin in these 20 questions because I know George really likes him, and I like George. I don't want to offend George. If you were listening to the show, we're not 30 seconds into the show, and he's asking about Sitchin. The board op, they call you about 5 or 6 minutes before the show, make sure you went to the bathroom. They said, well, George really wants to talk about angels. He doesn't really want to talk about, Jewish texts. Fine, whatever George wants to do. And I'm telling you, 30 seconds in, there it is. And he kept bringing it up. Okay, so I wanted to tell you, I didn't initiate that. It just happens. And so I'm willing to take the heat for it, and I'm also willing to do it because it needs to be done. Why, you might ask, do you think, Mike, it's important to speak out about what somebody else teaches? Is it any of my business? Isn't it mean? Are you just bored? I do get bored. I could have put here, don't you just want to make money off Zechariah Sitchin. I've been accused of that publicly by William Henry, and what I did for William was I posted my income tax returns on the internet for the last 3 years. Now, I blacked out the names and the social security numbers, and I said, here you go, William. Do you think you or Zechariah Sitchin will do the same? William removed his rant against me off his website. Okay? I am not in this for money. You don't believe me? Ask my wife. Okay? She wishes I was. You know. What if I was a lawyer and your friend, and I knew that the lawyer you had hired to represent you wasn't very competent in an area of the law critical to your interests? Should I say nothing? Should I let you get taken? Is that what you'd want? What if I was a doctor and a friend of yours and I suspected that your doctor was unaware of or hesitant to tell you about an experimental treatment that might save your life? Should I just shut up? Would you want me to say something? What if I was a financial advisor and I knew that an associate in my office who was managing your account was not getting you the return that you could be getting? Would you like me to say something? Okay, I'm none of those things. I'm also not a minister. What if I was a minister, though, and you came to me with a theological question, and I only gave you enough information to steer you toward my view? Is that honest? Is that fair? No, it's not. So my dilemma and my task is, on the one hand, I do acknowledge that a knowledge filter exists in academia, and that you do have some cause to be suspicious of academics. I'm an academic. I understand that. Academics don't want to touch this stuff with a 10-foot pole. As Richard Dolan told me today, I finally got to meet him. He said, we are in an academic ghetto. Okay? And there's a lot of truth to that. But there are those of us who think that the subject matter is important enough to just step outside of our own little world and quit pretending these things don't happen to people. I acknowledge that people's experiences are real. Okay? I am not a debunker. Okay? I know that what happens to people in this area, this is real stuff. Yeah, I can't claim to know exactly what is happening. I have my suspicions based upon my own area. When it comes to my own area, I can tell you what is up to snuff, and I can tell you where you're getting just hoodwinked and flim-flammed, okay, in this area. Another problem I have is I know that a lot of you aren't interested in language stuff. It isn't a sexy subject. A lot of you hated English, much less a foreign language. If I asked you to diagram a sentence now to save your life, you'd probably, half of you would just end up being carted away. Okay? I understand that, but I'm going to try it anyway. I also have to temper the academic enterprise and academic honesty with tact. And I'll admit this is sometimes difficult because I care about what people read in my area. You know, when you spend 20 years in an area and you get degrees, you start to have this little queer sense of ownership of it. It's my area, and so get it right, you dunderhead. You know, I'll admit that. I'll admit that because that's what my professors do to me. So it's my opportunity to do it to somebody else. No, it's just there's a certain expectation. If you publish a book and you claim to be an expert language scholar, you made the claim. Okay? You're in print. You have to live up to it. When I go to a conference, academic conference, there's a few I go to every year in my field, and I read a paper, and everybody in the room has a PhD in biblical studies. If I don't do a good job, I'm going to get hammered. And I have seen people get hammered. I have seen people deliver papers at conferences go away in tears. Okay, it happens. And so, yes, I'm sensitive to people getting it right. If you're going to make the claim, then put up or don't say anything. Acknowledging spiritual realities and forces, I do believe that scholarship is a spiritual issue. It is not just nuts and bolts, grunt academic work. Everybody has presuppositions. I have mine. Okay, you know about some of them. I'm a theist. Believe there's a God. If I believe there's a God, I believe he can actually do something. Okay, what would be the point if I didn't? I believe that he can actually supervise people to write things down for posterity, both what we would call scripture and not. That, in providence, he wants preserved. I operate with certain presuppositions as a theist. I don't believe Zechariah Sitchin is wrong in his analysis of ancient text. I know he's wrong. And I can empirically show you, and I will tonight. Okay, I know it's not very hard if you are in the field. Now, my challenge is to you, go ahead, check my credentials out. I don't have any phony degrees. They're real. My resume is on the internet. Ask yourself if it makes sense as we go through this material to believe what Mr. Sitchin says about the ancient texts against what the ancient Mesopotamians say. And I'm saying this for a specific point in the lecture. I will come back to this. But at some point, you're going to have to accept what he says over what the scribes themselves say. Now, my money's on the scribes. Okay? Ask yourself how Mr. Sitchin's work can be considered credible in light of its demonstrable errors. And ask yourself why Mr. Sitchin has refused to debate me since 2001. That's a little self-serving, I'll admit it. I'd kind of like to debate, but if it was over the radio, there are just things in here that will not translate well to radio, so it's probably good that we didn't debate. Some points are tough to make. Now, my challenge is to Mr. Sitchin. These have been on the internet for quite a while. Show me proof of your ancient language training. I mean, I'm at the point now where I don't want to see a degree. I want to see a class. I want to see one semester of anything. Explain why your word meanings are superior to those in ancient cuneiform dictionaries. Yes, believe it or not, the scribes themselves created dictionaries, and they're bilingual. Sumerian on one side, Akkadian on the other. We have literally 50 to 60,000 words in clay tablet dictionaries made by the scribes. We don't have to guess at what a word means and what they thought it means. They've told us what it means. And so often Mr. Sitchin's translations, and I use that word loosely, defy the Sumerian scribes themselves. I don't know of any other way to put it. Explain the language and translation errors in your books. Produce a single text, just one, a single text that says Nibiru is a planet beyond Pluto, and that text connects the Anunnaki to Nibiru. There is no text, none, zero, nada. There is no line of any cuneiform text that has that in it. That is entirely contrived. If you don't believe me, I have bibliography on my website. There are articles on Nibiru that account for every place it ever occurs in any tablet. And you can look them up for yourself in English translations. It ain't there. Explain why your God-planet correlations are contradicted by all cuneiform astronomical texts. I will explain that as we go. So let's get started here. 2 areas I want to hit on with 3 subjects in each. Sitchin and Mesopotamian astronomy. We will talk about the cylinder seal that he says shows that there's 12 planets. We'll talk about planet-God correlations and the identification of Nibiru. We'll explain those when we get there. And Sitchin in ancient languages, we'll discuss 3 terms that occur in his books a lot: Elohim, Nephilim, and the word Shem. Start with cylinder seal VA 243. The VA is, this seal is actually kept in the Forter Asiatica Museum in Berlin. That is the Museum of West Asian Antiquities. It's seal number 243. You've probably seen this. Now, here's the other reason I like this one. Actually, I just got this. My laser pointer. I get to play with a laser pointer. I better switch hands for this. This is delicate work. You see this right here? Zechariah Sitchin says this is indicative of 12 planets. He says this is the sun, and these dots around the sun, if you add them up, 4, 6, 7, 10, and one over here, 11, I think, did I do my math right? He says that plus the sun was counted as a planet, so he says there's 12 planets. Now, in the ancient world, it's true, sun and moon were counted as planets. And so if you take the 9 we know about plus sun and moon, that's 11, and he says this seal says there's 12. And so there must be a 12th planet out there. And of course, if you've read Zechariah Sitchin, he says this 12th planet is Nibiru. Now, move on to the slide here. The inscription on the seal actually says nothing about astronomy, Nibiru, or the planets. We'll get to that. The alleged sun symbol on the seal is not the sun. We know that because we can compare it to the consistent depiction of the symbology of the sun on hundreds of other cylinder seals, monuments, and pieces of Sumerian Mesopotamian art. We'll show you that. And there's not a single text on any existing Sumero-Mesopotamian tablet that says the Sumerians or Mesopotamians knew of more than 5 planets. There are a number of cuneiform tablets that deal with astronomy and cuneiform studies. All of them have been published. If you're a Sumerian scholar, you know about this material, or at least you should. They've all been compiled and published. Now this text again, this seal, here's what we'll call line 1, what scholars call line 1. Line 1, you'll notice, is an exact duplicate over here. It's repeated. We'll call this line 2, and this little bit down here, line 3. These symbols are the actual Sumerian that is on this seal. Now, it's not very exciting. Again, here is the publication. You want to look it up? Go ahead. I will give you the information. I always try to give you the bibliography. This is the West Asian Cylinder Seals, 1940, by Anton Mortgott. He's an expert on Sumerian cylinder seals. It's in German. If you read German, you're most fortunate. Line 1, Dubsiga is a personal name. Ili Ilat, another personal name. This is German Dein Knecht, for your servant. So that's what it says. Dubsiga, Ili Ilat, your servant. That's all the seal says. It has nothing to do with astronomy. Again, the translation's published since 1940. Zechariah Sitchin should have known about it. In simplest terms, the alleged sun seal, in the upper left corner of the seal, isn't the sun. And so the artwork doesn't depict the sun and our solar system. It's a star. We know this because of the consistent sun iconography of Sumerian Mesopotamian art. In case you're thinking, well, the sun's a star, the Sumerians and Mesopotamians distinguished these bodies in their artwork. This is your typical sun symbol. You'll notice there's usually a central circle, and of course you have points, which the symbol on the seal that Zechariah Sitchin has, VA243, has. But the key here is that sun iconography consistently has these wavy lines, the rays of the sun. Here's an actual example. You'll notice the wavy lines here. One of the most common artistic motifs is in Sumerian Mesopotamian art, they will depict the sun, the crescent moon, and the star together. And I bring this up to show you that they distinguished the symbols. Here's one example. Sun, wavy lines, crescent moon, star. Star, sun, again, wavy lines, crescent moon. This is the complete, we just had this one on the last slide, this is the complete stela. You notice these symbols. This is a common zodiacal symbol, the Sumerian Mesopotamian zodiac. This is the complete zodiac. And you'll notice again, star, crescent moon, sun, wavy lines, and the rest of the symbols in their zodiac. Another zodiac. Here we go again. Crescent moon, wavy lines for the sun, and a star. And the rest of the symbols of the zodiac. Draco, the scorpion, the whole bit. Another one. Crescent moon, the rays of the sun, star. And this 7 grouping here will interest you. This group of 7 is going to become important in this talk, and I'll come back to it. This is the Pleiades, because the Pleiades to the naked eye is a group of 7 stars. Again, these are actually called Kuduru stones. They're zodiacal stones. Here's a blow-up of that last stone. Crescent moon, wavy lines, star. Now, stars. There are several styles in Sumerian art. This is the one from VA243, the Sitchin seal. You'll notice they have different numbers of spokes or points. Here's 6. Here is 7. Here is 8. Okay, the Sitchin thing has 6. We'll get to the dots later. Here are the Pleiades. The reason this is important is you'll notice in this piece that they aren't always consistent in the way they are done. You have a certain number with points. This one didn't really, maybe 1 point you can get out of that. Some of the others, you can't discern a point on them. Here you have, again, the Pleiades, pointed stars with the crescent moon up here as well. This is well-known iconography. Here is our familiar grouping of 7. They're balls. Take note of that. They're just little balls. Here, more star iconography. Now the reason that that's important, I should go back here. You say, well, how can that be a star, Heiser? What are the things around it? They're also stars. What this is a certain constellation. I don't know enough astronomy to tell you what it is because the seal doesn't have any inscription on it that tells you. But just because they're balls does not mean they're not stars, as noted by the familiar Pleiades constellation. By the way, the Pleiades constellation shows up a lot in Sumerian art. So we talked about cylinder seal VA 243. Let's talk about planet-god correlations. There are a number of cuneiform tablets whose contents concern astronomical observations and planetary theory. In fact, you can buy a very exciting dissertation called somebody out there's laughing. Okay, I was a little facetious. Called Babylonian, or actually Sumerian and Babylonian planetary theory. It's all been published. Okay, there's nothing secret. No men in black came and stole the tablets. And okay, it's all been published for years. There are a number that deal with this. These texts, again, are accessible if you know the material. Here is the bibliography. I'm not going to bore you by reading the bibliography. If you want it, you can get the disc in the back. Some technical works. These are all the major works. Theory of the planets. It's all published. Now, the reason this is critical to understand and get into is that Sitchin places a highly literal interpretation on the epic of creation. That's the title of a Sumerian Babylonian epic. Sitchin's reconstruction of Earth's creation and our solar system requires the names of gods to be substituted for those of the planets as he has them. Here's what I mean by that, said in a little better way. Sitchin knows, or knew when he wrote, I guess, I have to make this presumption, that it was very common in Sumerian Mesopotamian mythology and epic literature, just as it is for the Greeks and whoever, that the celestial bodies to them corresponded to divine beings. Okay, so they would name them. Well, that star over there is Marduk. That star over there is Ea. That star over there is Anki. And they would create correlations in their astronomical texts. They would associate stars with divine beings. And so when the Sumerians did their rather boring work of astronomy, and they literally did the math. They could tell you when the lunar eclipse was going to happen. They knew 5 planets plus sun and moon. There are always only 5 in every astronomical cuneiform text, only 5 planets that they knew about, plus sun and moon. But they could trace their movements. They understood constellations and things like this. And they associated them with different deities in their pantheon. Okay, Sitchin knows that. So what he does is he goes back to Enuma Elish, the Epic of Creation, or Atrahasis, and he says, well, these gods in these stories must correspond to the planets in our solar system. And he creates these correlations and then rewrites, essentially, what these epic tales are telling us. And he has created an entire counter-mythology, an entire counter-literary work that has a 12th planet coming into our solar system in ancient times, essentially colliding with a planetary body, some cataclysmic event, that out of which comes Earth and Mars, and then this Nibiru planet goes way for a while, and it comes back in every 3,600 years. And he says that the Sumerian literature is actually describing these events, that when Nibiru came through, that the Anunnaki left their planet, or their ship that looks like a planet, came down here and genetically engineered us. Okay, the way his entire theory depends on his matching certain planets with certain gods. Well, guess what? His matches don't agree ever with any of the actual Sumerian correlations between planets and gods. Okay. Here's the table. I just summarized that. There are 5 planets, Sun and Moon. That is Mul Alpin, the cuneiform astrolabe. This isn't very, you can't really see this very well, but I've sort of done something with the next slide, but I just want to show you something. Here on Mul Alpin, the planets, and they include Sun and Moon, are listed. They knew of Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Mercury, and of course, Earth. They would give names, Sumerian names, to the various celestial bodies, and here are the lines. If you wanted to actually go look this book up, you can look at the lines of the text. It's translated in English. You can check what I'm saying. You'll notice the correlation here with, I have starred Jupiter for a reason. We'll come back to Jupiter. Just store that away. Here are the correlations. If you read the 12th planet, Sitchin will say the Sun is Abzu, Mercury is Mumu, Venus is Lahamu. Okay, the cuneiform astronomical text actually lists all of these. There is no Tiamat in this text. They didn't know of Pluto, Uranus, or Neptune. Nibiru, down here in Sitchin, was unknown as a planet, but note the asterisk. Nibiru is associated with Jupiter. It's also associated with Mercury in one text, and it is also just called a star. And that might give you the impression, well, did they know what it was? Well, again, we'll get to that. But the point here at this point in the discussion is that all of the actual correlations, none of them correspond to what Sitchin constructs. Now, my question here is really simple. This stuff has been published for a long time. Why didn't he just look it up? I'll tell you why. Because he needs these correlations to take them back into the texts and reinterpret the texts for you, the reader, to concoct the idea of a 12th planet that comes in here carrying aliens, and that's how we got here. He's got to have this. He's got to have these correlations, or his entire interpretive method is just dust. And that's what I'm suggesting you should consider it. Okay, we talked about the cylinder seal, planet-god correlations, identification of Nibiru under this heading of astronomy. According to Zechariah Sitchin, again, the Sumerians knew of an extra planet beyond Pluto. The planet was called Nibiru. Sitchin claims that Nibiru passes through our solar system every 3,600 years. While scholarly material in cuneiform astronomy is fairly abundant, specific treatments of Nibiru are rare. Here they are. Most of them are in German. It's too bad Richard Hoagland isn't here. I've had a German national in the Netherlands. You meet these wonderful people, and they get in touch with you after Coast to Coast. An elderly retired woman who took a year or two of Sumerian in the Netherlands, native German speaker. She translated them for me because I don't trust my own German. But I have them all transcripted for Richard because we're actually working on sort of a theory we have about what Nibiru actually is. But there they are. Fortunately for scholars and other interested parties, the work of the studies done above and the editors of the monumental Chicago Assyrian Dictionary, otherwise known as CAD, have located and compiled all the places where the word Nibiru and related forms of that word occur in existing tablets. A look at the CAD entry, volume N2, pages 145 to 147, tells us immediately that the word has a variety of meanings, all related to the idea of crossing. And Sitchin does say that, so he gets this right. Apparently he did look this up somewhere. It refers to crossing or being some sort of crossing marker or crossing point. Now in his theory, the 12th planet comes through our solar system and crosses the paths of planets every 3,600 years, so that's how he applies this. In only a minority of cases, these references in astronomical text, does the word relate to an astronomical body? Now the generic, I've just given you a couple instances here. Nibiru itself, just the word, can mean place of the crossing or crossing fee, and I've quoted the Gilgamesh epic here. Straight is the crossing point, the word is Nibiru there, a gateway. Narrow is the way that leads to it. It can be a ferry or ford, kind of the river Styx kind of thing where you're ferried across to the netherworld here. The following chart represents a complete listing of the word Nibiru in astronomical text or astronomical context. If one wants to know what Nibiru as an astronomical body is, according to the Mesopotamians anyway, one is dependent on these texts. Let me rephrase that. If you want to know what Nibiru is, and you want to actually take the scribes' view of what Nibiru is, you got to go with these texts. It's the only place they discuss it. If you want to go with Zechariah Sitchin and come up with something else, you're free to do that. It's a free country, but you will be against the Sumerians themselves. One either lets the text tell you what it is or you don't. Now, superscripted D is a sign for God. Superscripted mul is the sign for star. I realize this isn't going to come out very well. I've mentioned what it's associated with. If you get my discs back there, this will show up better. What I've done, and this is on my website where you can view it more closely and enlarge it, so you wouldn't even have to get the disc. Here are the references to Nibiru. This is the Sumerian and Akkadian transliteration. Here's the translation, and it's not my translation that I've made up. Here are the references that you can go look yourself. Okay? I'm not insisting that you take my word for it. You know, take somebody who does Sumerian for a living, and you know, that should suffice. Now, I've already said it's associated with Jupiter, Mercury, and a star. And you might wonder, well, maybe they didn't know exactly what it was. And that's debate and something Richard and I have sort of talked about, and I have mentioned something to Dave Flynn as well about this because I think it has something to do with precession. And I don't understand astronomy or precessional cycles well enough to really know that. But now that I have the, you know, what I consider reliable German translations of the German articles, I can go back and ditch my own and go back and look. And we were hoping to do that, but maybe some other time. One thing is certain, though, from the text: Nibiru is never, ever, ever, okay, never identified as a planet beyond Pluto, ever. In fact, in Mol Apin, if you actually plot out what Mol Apin says about the calendar months and the association of certain stars with those months, here is Nibiru. It is associated with Marduk in this month. Now, in the Babylonian calendar, the appearance, catch this, the appearance of Nibiru was associated with the beginning of the new year. That means that Nibiru, whatever it is, was spotted. It could be visually spotted every year. Not every 3,600 years. Every year. Again, I'm not claiming to know what it was. I do think it has something to do with constellations and precession. But this is the verdict of the texts themselves. Bankruptcy of what he's saying in the 12th planet. VA 243 does not prove the Sumerians knew of 12 planets. It runs counter to Sumerian iconography. There isn't a single cuneiform text for Sitchin's planet god correlations. There isn't a single cuneiform text that has Nibiru as a planet beyond Pluto. It shows up every 3,600 years, but there are texts that specifically contradict that. There isn't a single cuneiform text that links Nibiru with the Anunnaki. Let's move on to the ancient languages part. Sitchin's misunderstanding of the Hebrew word Elohim. Again, this is very common in the discussion. When I go on shows, we discuss this. We'll talk about Elohim, we'll talk about Nephilim, and Sitchin's fabricated meanings for Sumerian Shumu, Akkadian Shamu, and Hebrew Shem. If you don't get what those are now, just hang on, we'll get to them, and I'll slow down and go through them. Let's talk about Elohim first. Now, Sitchin claims the following about the meaning of the word Elohim. He says Elohim is a plural in the Hebrew language. That's true. He says Elohim always means gods, plural. That is false. In fact, most of the time, Elohim occurs a little under 2,300 times, and the plural usage it's quite unusual. Elohim refers to like foreign gods in the Hebrew Bible. Then there it's plural. But when speaking of something to do with Israel's religion, the plural is extremely rare. It's very, very, so rare, in fact, that dictionaries actually list them. It's so rare. Again, you can just go look it up. Elohim is morphologically plural. Morphology refers to the shape, our word morph, or construction of a word, its form, how it's spelled, how it's written. While Elohim is plural in form, the question is it plural in meaning? Elohim can be either singular or plural in meaning, depending on three things. Grammatical indications elsewhere in the text that help you to determine if the singular or plural is meant, grammatical rules in Hebrew that are true in the language as a whole, and historical or logical context. By itself, Elohim is ambiguous. You need context to tell you what it means. We have words like these in English. Sheep and church. Illustration. The sheep is lost. Now, if I say that to you, the word is tells you something. It's a singular verb. You know when you read this sentence, I have to be referring to one sheep because of the verb is. The grammar tells you which one it is. I wouldn't say, I are lost, unless I was a dunderhead. You would use a verb that goes with a singular subject. I am lost. So the verb, the grammar, tells you which one it is. Hence, if I say the sheep are lost, the word are is a plural verb. It tells you immediately what sheep means, singular or plural. We're going to church this morning. Emperor Diocletian made it his mission to persecute the church. This one, intuitively you know that we're going to a singular church. We're not going to go visit a dozen. Okay, we're going to church. We're going to one building to do our business there, to worship. This one, however, is collective. It's plural. Diocletian just didn't pick on one church in the ancient Roman world. He picked on as many as he could find. Context, logical context tells you what the word means. Like English or any language, Hebrew operates by grammatical and logical rules. The word Elohim, while plural in shape, derives its meaning from grammar and logical context. The best verse in the Bible for this is Psalm 82:1. Now notice this. God, Elohim, stands, we'll get to this, in the divine assembly. This is the classic divine council verse. Among the divine beings, Elohim, or among the gods, he pronounces judgment. Now look at this. It's the same word in the Hebrew text. This one has got to be singular. Why? Because this is a singular verb. Specifically, it's the PL stem, third masculine singular. This one has to be plural because this preposition, among, you can't be among one. You got to be among at least two. Technically, grammatically more. So you have the same word. The grammar tells you this one's singular, this one's plural. You have the same shape, same morphology, same word, but different meaning. Most of the time in the Hebrew Bible, roughly again 2,300 times, the word Elohim is singular in meaning. And I'm not saying that because that's what I like to say, that's what the grammar says. It's the exact opposite of what Sitchin says. This is because Elohim is so commonly used, it kind of bloats the statistic. It's so commonly used as the proper name for Israel's God. Now this gibberish, I mean, this illustrates the extent that I try to go for an audience or people on the website. This was actually a gift from some people at home. I now have the most, how can I say this, the premier Hebrew lexicon, Hebrew dictionary there is in the world. I have it on CD now. It's really cool. And this is an entry from it, so now I get to put it in PowerPoint. This is actually what it says. Elohim becomes singular, blah, 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 God, deity, Babylonian, Assyrian, Ugaritic, here's how it's spelled. Formally construed as a plural. It's so rare to have Elohim as a plural when it's not referring to like foreign gods, but something to do with Israel's God or Israel's belief system, that they list them. Okay, these are just abbreviations. Elohim, Elohim Hayim, Niglu, Ha Elohim, so on and so forth. I mean, they list them. And this isn't the first time they've been listed. I mean, again, he could have looked this up. Sitchin also claims that the form Ha Elohim, notice the H, this is the He in Hebrew, on Elohim, is always, quote, always plural. Again, this is just wrong. Not only in light of the dictionary entry, but I'll give you two examples that are quite illustrative. Deuteronomy 4:35 is kind of a classic. It has been clearly demonstrated to you that the Lord, that's Yahweh, and I hope I'm not offending anyone by pronouncing the name, the Tetragrammaton, YHWH, that the Lord alone is Ha Elohim. There is none beside him. Third masculine singular pronoun. Isn't this exciting? Talk about pronouns. You go to a UFO conference, talk about pronouns. Okay, but here's the point. The text tells you it's one person, the Lord, Yahweh. The Lord our God is one, Deuteronomy 6:4, the Shema of Israel, the guts of their theology. There's only one of these, and he is Ha Elohim. What it means is he is the God, par excellence. There is none beside him. Another example, Genesis 26, this is Yahweh again speaking to Pharaoh. And God, Ha Elohim, said, the verb is singular, third masculine singular, this is the kal stem. God said to him in a dream, so on and so forth. But these are very easy to find. Finally, the most telling blunder in Sitchin's treatment of Elohim, and this just still astonishes me. The same phenomenon, morphological plural word that is used to denote a singular God, shows up in cuneiform, in Akkadian and Sumerian. It happens in the Elamarna texts over 100 times, just in one corpus of text. The Elamarna texts, if you're not familiar with them, were obviously discovered in Elamarna, which is in Egypt, and in the 13th century. At that time, Akkadian, cuneiform, but the Akkadian language was the language of the day, kind of like English is now. Everybody uses English across the world. In this time period, everybody used Akkadian. It was the language of international correspondence. So these are actually Egyptian texts from a pharaoh to some underlings in Palestine, some people he'd put in charge of different places in Palestine, written in Akkadian, though, not in Egyptian. But the word in Akkadian that corresponds to Hebrew Elohim is Ilanu, which literally and grammatically by itself means gods. In Sumerian, the plural is written with the signs dinger and mesh. I'm quoting here the Sumerian language. This is a common Sumerian grammar. Mesh is the enclitic copula, isn't that exciting? With plural suffix. In Sumerian ideograms and Akkadian context and in late Sumerian texts, mesh is used as a sort of plural ending like ene. We're not going to get into Sumerian here. This plural word for gods in Akkadian is used to denote the singular deity on Egypt's throne, Pharaoh. Remember, Pharaoh was considered a deity incarnate. There's only one Pharaoh on the throne at a time. Here's an actual example. Here's the Sumerian, here's the Akkadian, English translation. The king, my Lord, singular, singular, my sun god, singular, my Ilanu. It's a plural form, but it means one God. It's over 100 times just in the Elamarna texts. This is the kind of thing that when I hear, Sitchin referred to, and again, I just care that the audience is not hoodwinked. When I hear someone refer to Zechariah Sitchin as an ancient languages scholar, I just want to, I don't become apoplectic, all right? But it just bugs me, because this is the kind of thing that if you've taken, a semester in the languages, or if you even know what the tools are, you can go find in 10 minutes. Okay? It's just not that difficult. We talked about Elohim, let's go to Nephilim. Zechariah Sitchin proposes that the word Nephilim means fallen ones at its base, and then extrapolates this to mean those who came down from above, those who were cast down, which he ultimately says people of the fiery rockets. Now that has no linguistic basis at all. But if they're fallen from heaven, they must have come down or been cast down. He wants you to think that the word Nephilim refers to aliens who came here in rocket ships. Okay? Now, they're important to Sitchin since they allow this assertion, but does Nephilim mean fallen from heaven or anywhere else? The answer is no. The word Nephilim does not mean fallen ones. And to Sitchin's credit, he may be drawing on Hebrew dictionaries here. Most will, in fact, say the term does mean fallen ones. However, scholars of historical Hebrew grammar have recognized that this explanation is problematic because, I'm going to skip this. Let's go. Nephilim in Hebrew, for this word to mean fallen ones in Hebrew, is actually impossible because of the morphology. The shape of the word is disallowed by it. Now, this is a little complicated what we're going to go through here, and I'm just so glad I have my little pointer here to try to illustrate this. What we're saying here is that this word doesn't mean fallen ones, and I'm saying it can't if the word is Hebrew. You say, well, it's the Hebrew Bible. What else would it be? We'll get to that. Nephilim is spelled two ways in the Hebrew Bible. You don't have to know Hebrew, but you just count. Okay, there's the N, the P, the L, the I or the Y, and the M. That's one way. Here's another way. You'll notice there's a little extra letter here. Isn't that neat? My little effect there. Right here, this letter is different than this one. Both of them are Nephilim, but it's spelled two ways. You say, oh, who cares? Well, it's actually important. The first option, without the little red mark, little red letter in there, first option seems to suggest that the word Nephilim might come from the root naphal, N-P-A-L, which means to fall, since the word looks like it's N-P-L plus the eem ending. So it might mean fallen ones. However, naphal is a verb, to fall. The meaning fallen ones is passive. A person is said to be fallen when something happens to them, as opposed to doing the action of their own will. Hebrew verbs that function as nouns are pronounced or vocalized in a specific way that tells the reader a passive is meant. If the Hebrew scribe wanted to describe someone who was fallen, like he cast out of heaven or came down from heaven or fell from heaven in some object, he would spell it differently than what actually occurs. Here is how Nephilim looks in the Bible we have right now. Notice the consonants. When the vowels were added, they're these little dots. However, if you wanted to write fallen ones, you would spell it this way, Nephilim. You'd put this letter in the middle. This is how a Hebrew scribe would spell fallen ones. This is not this. This is Nephilim in the Bible as we have it. This is not. Even if Sitchin or someone else were to argue that the word means those who fall down like upon an enemy. This is very common in Christian circles, by the way, to get away from the idea of giants actually being in the Bible. Even if you want to say that, then those who fall upon an enemy like a warrior, which is an active idea, not passive. That spelling doesn't work either, because if you have one semester of Hebrew, you know that it's spelled this way, no-phelim. This is the plural participle. This, notice, with the dot here, is not this. Now you say, no, wait a minute, Mike. Okay, it doesn't have this, Nephilim, or no-phelim. Doesn't have either of those. It has this, Nephilim, with the I in the middle. That's the way it's spelled. How do you know, since Hebrew had no vowels initially, how do you know that we need this I here? How do you know that this is the correct spelling and not any of the other ones? Because of the second spelling. This little letter proves, it tells us that this is the correct spelling because Hebrew did not have vowels initially. So what they did, they started to use consonants to do double duty, to function as vowels, like we use the letter Y, either as a vowel or a consonant. They did the same thing. And since this spelling shows up, it requires that you have the middle I. Okay, we'll skip this explanation of that. This is the correct spelling and the most ancient way, prior to the invention of vowel marks, that Nephilim should be spelled. This is the correct meaning. It has the yod in the middle. In other words, the Hebrew spelling proves it can't come. The word does not come from Naphal. It does not mean fallen ones. So what does it come from? There are two possibilities. It could be an Aramaic word, Naphal. This happens all the time. Aramaic was brought into the Hebrew Bible, many Aramaic words, because when the Bible was finalized in its final form, that was done during the Babylonian exile. The Jews were living in Babylon, and they spoke Aramaic. So that could be a possible explanation. We've already covered this. The stronger possibility, though, right here, is that it comes from the Aramaic noun nephilah, which, guess what, means giant. The word would be nephilim in Aramaic when it was brought into the Hebrew Bible. The final ending was changed for proper Hebrew, and it means giant. This is why every ancient, and I mean everyone, every ancient Jewish text in or out of the Bible that discusses Nephilim says that they're giants. Every one. I mean, they know what they're doing. Consequently, the very meaning that Sitchin rejects in his books is the only one that is possible in light of historical grammar. Amazingly, this very word, Nephilim, occurs in a text that Sitchin discusses in his book, Stairway to Heaven. He's discussing something called the Genesis Apocryphon at one point in one of his books. But as we'll note in a few slides, Sitchin doesn't know the text is Aramaic. He can't tell Aramaic from Hebrew for some reason. So he misses the true origin of the biblical word. Again, if he's a language expert, he should know this. Now, we've seen the grammar doesn't support him, but can Nephilim be identified with the biblical sons of God? This is another thing Sitchin wants to do. He says the Nephilim are the ones who were impregnating the women because he wants the aliens creating humanity. But the biblical text distinguishes the sons of God from the Nephilim. They are not the same. And again, this is very easy to demonstrate. When men began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God, B'nai Ha-Elohim, saw the daughters of men were beautiful, so on and so forth. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward when the sons of God went into the daughters of men and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, the men of renown. The key question is, when the text says they were the heroes of old, the men of renown, is that phrase speaking of the sons of God or the Nephilim? Sitchin argues that all the phrases in Genesis 6, including this one, refer to the same beings and equates the two. Reasons why that's not so. The text very clearly contrasts sons of God, daughters of men, divine, human. The text very clearly tells us that the Nephilim were not divine. They were mighty men of renown. They're not divine beings, so they're not the sons of God. Comparing, wider context. These references are to giants elsewhere outside of Genesis in the biblical text. And notice something when in Israel's later history, when they encountered giants, how the descriptions were. We saw the Nephilim there. The Anakites, or the Anakim, come from the Nephilim. This is when they go into the land. Joshua and Caleb said, hey, let's go get the land. The spies that Moses sends in said, forget it. We're going to get squashed like bugs because they're really big. And they chicken out. Later, we have in Joshua 14, the name of Hebron was formerly Kiriath Arba. Arba was the greatest man among the Anakites. They're not gods. They are hybrid humans. They have a divine human heritage, but they are not gods. They are hybrids. They are less than gods. The Lord said to me, do not harass the Moabites. This is Deuteronomy. This is Moses speaking. Don't pick on the Moabites. They're nice. Blah, 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 blah. I'm going to give their land to Lot. It was formerly inhabited by the Amim, a people. Is the Hebrew word, a people, great and numerous and as tall as the Anakites. Like the Anakites, they're counted as Rephaim, but the Moabites call them Amim. Again, this is the generic word for a human population. Deuteronomy 3. These are the wars. Moses is describing how they tried to go in and get the promised land. We took all his cities at that time. There was not a city which we took from them, 80 cities. All the region of Argob, the kingdom of Og in Bashan. Well, who's Og? Well, we'll find out. Cities were fenced with high walls and gates and bars. It was a really tough job, but the Lord helped us. We utterly destroyed the men, women, and children of every city, for only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of the giants. Now, in my other talk on serpentine beings, watchers, I think we get into this a little bit. Well, Genesis 6 would probably hit more of it. I can't even remember what day it is anymore. My view is that the reason that Joshua was commanded, and it wasn't very often, he was commanded to go into a city and just totally destroy it. It was called being put under the cherem, under the ban. When Joshua was commanded that, if you look at the places where he was commanded to do that, and you looked at who lived in those places, guess what? They're giants. They're the giant clans. They live in the same places. I think it was a deliberate attempt to do what Enoch describes in wiping out the Nephilim. We'll get to that in another session. Again, Og was a giant. He was one of the Nephilim. But his people were described as men, women, and children. Enoch, same thing. Are the Nephilim, as Sitchin says, are the Nephilim and the sons of God the same? No Jewish text agrees with him. Here's Enoch. The angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after the women. This is Enoch's version of Genesis 6. Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men and beget us children. And Semyaza, also spelled this way, who was their leader, said, and then, by the way, and this is not, I didn't come up with this. A friend of mine, Lynn Marzulli, came up with this. Anybody recognize this term? Yeah. Billy Meyer's acquaintance, according to the Jewish text, was the leader of the Watchers. 1 Enoch 7, all the other angels took to themselves wives, they became pregnant, and they bare great giants. The giants didn't make them pregnant, the angels did. Sons of God. I know I'm belaboring this, but for some, I don't understand why. I do understand why, but I'm speaking rhetorically here. I don't know why Sitchin wants to equate the Nephilim with the sons of God, and hence the Anunnaki, because every Jewish text distinguishes them. And again, it's not like I'm coming up with something new here. Enoch's been published for quite a long time. 1 Enoch 15, which we'll talk about a little bit more in my serpentine beings talk, evil spirits coming out of their bodies, because from the day that they were created from the holy ones, they were watchers. Okay? Now this sounds, again, a little bit like it merges the two. But let's continue here. We'll get to the text again that in Enoch that explains 1 Enoch 15. The giants in Enoch were half watcher, half human. As such, the Enoch views them as evil, like father, like son, or like so. They're evil like the watchers. They were so from birth. God punished the giants with the flood, according to both Enoch and Genesis. When a giant was killed, only the human side died. The other half lived as a watcher. And that thing, that entity, became known as an evil spirit, or the Shadim, demons. This is the Jewish explanation for where demons come from. A demon is a disembodied watcher, a disembodied remnant of a dead Nephilim, which is why the Nephilim are always associated with Sheol, the underworld. There are no texts in all the ancient Jewish literature that equates the two. It's very clear in Enoch, they're different. There's one text that comes close to making the equation, and Sitchin does refer to this text, but again commits an amazing error in this. Genesis Apocryphon, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, is a fairly lengthy Aramaic text from Qumran. It's essentially an amplification of Genesis 5 through 15. In this text, Noah's father, Lamech, confronts his wife, it's kind of a funny text, Batanosh, about his suspicion that the child she's carrying, who is Noah, was actually fathered by a watcher. Because it's just happening all around him, and when his wife gets pregnant, he's like, oh, boy, what, is it mine or is it one of theirs? Okay, so this text actually goes into this, but before we get to it, I want to explain a bit how we know it's Aramaic, because it'll become important. Here's the text. I should have provided a translation. It says, behold, I reckoned in my heart that from the Irene, this is the word for watchers, that from the watchers this child was conceived, and from the holy ones, the Kadishin in Aramaic, from the holy ones it was. And the Nephilim. Now it looks, here it's all in white, and there are some words that are underlined and some things in yellow. Underlined words are unique to Aramaic. They do not occur in Hebrew. Yellow endings are the typical Aramaic ending. Now there's a point to this, so stick with me. Some would translate the text as follows. Behold, by the way, this was discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, this particular text, the Genesis Apocryphon. Behold, I considered in my heart that this conception was from the Watchers, from the Holy Ones, and from the Nephilim. Some would want to translate it that way, and the rest of the line is gone. We just don't have it. Translation seems to equate the Watchers and Nephilim, but the translation is erroneous for several reasons. Notice the enlarged words here. Okay? Behold, colors match here. I considered in my heart this conception was from, this is the word from, it's min in Hebrew, from the Watchers, and from the Holy Ones. This is different. It doesn't say from the Nephilim, even though Sitchin wants to translate it that way. It is a different word. It's actually a preposition, one letter. It means with respect to the Nephilim. This is a separate subject, separate entity, separate group than these other two. And we know that because the prepositions don't agree. There the three are. Later in the text, Bathanash, she's confronted by her husband. Is it mine? Is the kid mine? Or is it one of these divine beings, one of these Watchers? And she says, I was troubled in my heart because of the child. And she says to her husband, I swear to you by the Holy Great One, the King of Heaven, that this seed is yours and that this conception is from you. This fruit was planted by you and not by a stranger or watcher or by any of the sons of heaven. It's noteworthy she does not include the Nephilim in her denial, because the Nephilim are different than the sons of heaven. They are not the same. This is just about Watchers. Watchers are consistently referred to as holy ones in the Bible. Holy one, holy one, holy one. Again, linking that. Now here's my point with Sitchin here. At any rate, Sitchin's understanding of the text is highly suspect by virtue of a startling blunder. On page 111, at the bottom of his book, Stairway to Heaven, it's my 1980 edition. I know it's been reprinted, so the pages may not match, but Sitchin notes correctly that the sons of God, which he translates incorrectly, the sons of the gods, he says they're Watchers. He's right there. He then proceeds to enlighten the reader as to what, and this is a quote, the original Hebrew term is that has been translated Watchers or giants in the ancient versions. He doesn't like that translation. Then he says on page 112, but as we examined the Hebrew original, we find it does not say Watchers, it says Nephilim. He refers to the Hebrew original, but the text isn't Hebrew. It's Aramaic. Again, because of the endings, because of this word here, ending. He says the line doesn't say Watchers, but right here's the word. Here's Nephilim, here's Watchers. I mean, I just don't know how you can make a mistake like this, or two of them on the same page. Irene back here, just so you know I'm not hoodwinking you. Look at the first three letters, this one, this one, this one. Here's my neat little CD-ROM dictionary. Here's the entry, ear, watcher, angel. Gives a few examples. Plural, Irene, watcher, meaning angel, Daniel 4. I gave you those texts. Again, I'm not making it up. We talked about Elohim, Nephilim, and finally tonight, Sitchin's Shumu, Shamu, and Shem. This is where he gets rocket ships. Comes from Genesis 11 in his mind. Everyone on the earth had the same language. This is the Tower of Babel story. And the same words. And as they migrated from the east, they came upon a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them hard. Bricks serve them as stone, and bitumen serve them as mortar. And they said, come, let us build a city and a tower with its top in the sky to make a name, the Hebrew word there is Shem, to make a Shem for ourselves, else we'll be scattered all over the world. Now, interestingly enough, what are they building? A city and a tower. City, tower. Ir in Hebrew, Migdal in Hebrew. They're not building a Shem. Okay, but Sitchin's going to want to say that they're building a rocket ship. They're not building the Shem. They want to make a name for themselves. And Sitchin in his book says this is the word Shem, yes, it means name most of the time, but the word is, this meaning here is absolutely absurd. They're obviously building a rocket ship. And he constructs the argument in a certain way. He says that they wanted to make themselves a Shem. It's actually a flying craft. Specifically, he argues that Hebrew Shem derives from the Akkadian Shamu, which in turn comes from Sumerian Shu-mu. The last phrase, Shu-mu, supposedly means that which is a mu. And a mu is, according to Sitchin, a rocket ship. There's the page in the 12th planet. So he's saying this word shu means that which is a mu. That which is a mu. One does not need to be able to read Sumerian, Akkadian, and Hebrew to see how misguided the view is, but it helps. Again, they're building the city and the tower. But what about that word Shem? Little segue, or not a segue, little rabbit trail here on lexical lists. What really destroys this view is the existence of cuneiform dictionaries. We know what a Shamu is, and it ain't a rocket ship. This word is in the dictionaries they gave us. We have the Sumerian terms and what they meant in Akkadian and vice versa. It is perhaps the most well-understood ancient Near Eastern language, Akkadian that is. Lexical lists, these are cuneiform dictionaries. Just like we have Webster's. Word and then what it means. Different language, equations. These have been published since the 1930s. They're still being published. There's so much of this material that we're now up to, about 18 or 19 volumes in one series. This contains tens of thousands of words. The most thorough series, a 17-volume set, Materials for the Sumerian Lexicon, it's in German. The words in question are in those lists. Sitchin's definitions are contradicted by the Sumerian scribes themselves. Does Akkadian Shamu come from Sitchin's Shu-mu? Does Sumerian even have a word that means that which is a mu? The answer is no. Mr. Sitchin's translation of Shu-mu presupposes that Shu is what's called in grammar a relative pronoun. The classification of pronouns in all languages that mean that which. Mr. Sitchin is apparently unaware of Sumerian grammar at this point because the Sumerian language does not have relative pronouns. One only need to consult a Sumerian grammar to find this out, such as John L. Hayes' Manual of Sumerian Grammar. By the way, if you're going to study Sumerian, this is a good one. Some of this is really dense. The result of this oversight on Sitchin's part is that the Sumerian phrase, which he says is underlying Hebrew Shem, does not exist in Sumerian. I'm not quibbling over his translation. I'm saying the word itself doesn't exist. It's made up. Shumu is completely fabricated. What about the Akkadian Shamu, then? That's a real word, but it refers to the heavens or a part of the heavens, not to an object in the heavens. Interestingly, the lexical lists tell us that the Sumerian word mu also means heavens. I don't know if you can see this, but this comes from Wayne Horowitz's published dissertation, Mesopotamian Cosmic Geography. This is a book that I refer to a lot because it takes every word for every part of Sumerian cosmology and studies it. This was his dissertation, so he has to account for every occurrence. He has Shamu here, Akkadian Shamu, unlike Sumerian An, which means heaven, is a plural noun. So again, the shape is heaven. The shape is plural. It's cognated the most common names for heaven in other Semitic languages. The cognate form, originally Ladumu, is by far the most common and is used, next page, in all genres and all periods. Although the origins of Shamu are unknown, a learned etymology is offered in the series Inan Gisharanki. That's a Sumerian term. The word Shamu means heaven. In the lexical lists, it means heaven. It can mean rain, something that comes from the heavens in terms of meteorology. Here's a lexical list. It's K2035. That's the name of it. It's in the British Museum. Here's the word mu on one hand, left hand. You'll notice, I know it's hard to read, Sha-mu-u. Mu and Shamu mean the same thing. They mean heaven or part of the heavens. Here's the word mu again. Here's the text. Again, you can look all these up and go consult English translations. It does not mean a rocket ship. How does Sitchin get the Hebrew word for the Shem from an Akkadian word for the heavens? Again, He concocts it from this form and then just essentially makes the rest of it up. He refers to the standard translation, Shem, make us a name, as nonsense. And I think I know why he didn't use the standard Akkadian dictionary. Again, CAD, Chicago Assyrian Dictionary, which has taken decades to compile. I have a blow-up of this. Here is the actual entry from the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary for Shamu. Let's blow this up a little bit, or Shumu, excuse me. It means name, fame, reputation. By the way, look at this. See this reference to tablets? Here's what they do in this dictionary. This is why it's taken 30, 40, 50 years to do. They give you the term and the meaning, and then they list every stinking tablet that it's in. Okay, this is not easy work. And they're not guessing. There are actually people who do this for a living. This dictionary, by the way, I don't own the set, but it's almost 30 volumes now. Another page. Again, Shumu. We'll blow this up a little bit. Name or reputation. Here are actual cuneiform tablets where the translation that Sitchin says is nonsense is clearly what the word means. Conclusion. That's the end of the situation. Back to my dilemma that I mentioned earlier. How do I make this digestible to people? Well, frankly, it's not easy. You've been brave to sit through it. It doesn't make for very good radio, as you might imagine. It's tough. You know, I want to, on one hand, again, acknowledge that there's a knowledge filter. Acknowledge for you that, yes, you do have the right to be suspicious of academics, like myself, in certain regards, because the group of us tends to be very, skeptical is not the right word. There are just people who just think this is an utter waste of time, and who just think that anyone who believes in this, anyone who's experienced anything outside of the material, natural world is just an idiot. They are totally naturalistic. There's no such thing as a non-physical reality. And for you to take any text seriously, that you actually believe what's in the biblical text, it's just a total waste of time. I just try to be fair with the material. Yes, I realize that there's some confrontation here, but I think you should care that a lot of what is being put forth, and not just in Zechariah Sitchin's books. He's the name that keeps coming up, so that's the name I talk about. But there are a lot of other figures who parrot what he says and come out with aliens coming on this 12th planet world, coming through our solar system, making you and me, genetically manipulating it and creating us, and peddle that as the truth, and that's what the ancient languages and the ancient texts really say. No, it isn't. I mean, it just isn't. I'm not claiming to have all the answers, but I can tell you this, it ain't that.